Welcome to human and time. Make yourself comfortable, and let the noise beyond this journey grow a little more distant. If these quiet passages through the past bring you some peace, you can like the video and subscribe to join us again. And now, without hurrying, we will go back to a world in which the horse belongs to no one. The land opens beneath an enormous sky. There are no roads drawn across it, no fences dividing one patch of grass from another, no stable doors, no iron shoes, no saddles waiting beside a wall. The horizon seems almost too far away to measure, a long meeting place of earth and air, broken here and there by low vegetation, river water, and the darker edge of shrubs and scattered trees, where the open steppe leans toward forest. Steppe. Wind moves first. It travels over the grass in broad invisible waves, pressing one patch flat and then releasing it, carrying the dry scent of stems, damp earth from lower ground, and the faint coolness of water. Clouds pass overhead, and their shadows travel for great distances across the plain. In warmer seasons the land can soften into green. In colder ones, frost and snow alter every surface, muffling what had once been sharp beneath the feet, and somewhere beyond the reach of the nearest human voice, horses are moving. Long before anyone can call a horse property, long before anyone can choose which stallion should sire which foal, people already know these animals well. They know them as animals of the living landscape, as prey, as moving bodies that must be watched carefully. Human communities across Eurasia have hunted wild horses for thousands of years. The relationship begins not with reins, not with riding, and not with affection in the form we might recognize today. It begins with attention. To hunt an animal successfully, you must learn something of the animal's world. You must understand where water lies. You must notice the shape of movement. You must recognize what happens when a herd becomes alert, how quickly distance can open between a human body and a horse that has decided to flee. You watch the direction of the wind. You learn that the wide plain is never truly empty, because even when an animal has vanished, its path remains in bent grass, disturbed soil, droppings, tracks, and the memory of where the herd was seen before. The horse, for its part, has no reason to welcome a human approach. Modern observations of Przewalski's horses cannot simply be projected backward as though they were photographs of the 4th millennium BCE, but they remind us of something basic about an animal that has not been habituated to people. Unfamiliar humans can provoke a strong flight response. Even horses living under modern care may require long periods of habituation before they tolerate close human touch. So imagine the distance itself. Not a dramatic chase, not a sudden conquest, a space between species. A head lifts above the grass, ears turn, attention gathers. Another animal notices. The stillness changes before the herd moves, and then the distance widens again. For a very long time, that distance is part of the relationship. Humans learn to cross it only through knowledge. The wild horse is not an invention waiting to happen. It is an animal already complete, in its own world, feeding, moving, reproducing, responding to weather, water, season, danger, and the behavior of other horses. In modern Przewalski's horses, social groups can include a stallion, several mares, and their young, while younger males may live in separate bachelor groups. We should not turn this modern pattern into a rigid portrait of every ancient herd, but it gives us a careful glimpse of the social animal that humans were eventually attempting to manage. That matters because domestication does not begin with an object. It begins with another living will. A horse can turn away. A horse can panic. A horse can refuse proximity simply by leaving. Across the open country of northern Kazakhstan, long before the great concentration of horses seen at Botai, Neolithic people live more mobile lives. Their settlements are smaller and more temporary than the large communities that will later appear. They hunt a broad range of animals: horse, red deer, elk, aurochs, saiga. The horse is important, but it has not yet swallowed the whole economy. The world is diverse in flesh and movement. There are different tracks on the ground, different shapes at the edge of sight, different migrations and opportunities. Human life responds to this variety rather than organizing itself around one dominant animal. A day in such a landscape is governed less by walls than by distance. Distance to water, distance to game, distance to another temporary place of rest, distance to the animals that keep moving while people watch. The temperature changes quickly across the open land. Wind finds exposed skin. Moist ground near a river feels different underfoot from the dry steppe above it. The smell of mud clings close to water. Away from it, grasses and low plants take over. A fire changes the air immediately, smoke settling into clothing and hide, warmth held for a while against the cold. At night the plain does not become empty. It becomes less visible. Sound stretches farther when there is little to interrupt it. The movement of animals beyond the edge of a camp, the restless breathing of a dog, the small changes in wind, the crackle of fuel in a fire, none of these need to be loud to matter. Human beings have spent so long listening to environments like this that silence is never simply the absence of sound. It is a field of attention. Somewhere in that attention horses remain, not yet mounts, not yet engines of travel, not yet the animals that will later pull light vehicles, carry riders, transform communication, and alter the human sense of how far away another place can be. For now, their value is more immediate. They are bodies containing meat, fat, hide, bone, and the possibility of survival. That reality should not be softened. The earliest close human relationships with horses were not born from the modern idea of companionship. At Botai itself, many centuries later, enormous quantities of horse bone and evidence of butchery will make this unmistakable. The animal that will one day carry the human being is first, for a very long time, an animal humans kill, and yet hunting creates its own strange intimacy. To pursue something repeatedly is to study it. A hunter does not need a written theory of horse behavior. Repeated experience becomes knowledge held in the body when to wait. When movement is too sudden, where a herd is likely to find water, how terrain channels escape, how far an animal can be approached before its posture changes. Generations can inherit such knowledge without ever writing it down. The children of one hunting community can grow into adults who know the same plains more deeply than strangers would. The horse can become familiar without becoming tame. This distinction is important. Familiarity is not domestication. Hunting is not husbandry. A herd moving through a landscape is not yet a herd whose reproduction humans control. The long story ahead depends on not collapsing these stages into one convenient beginning. There may never have been a single beginning at all. Different communities in different parts of Eurasia could form different relationships with different horse populations. Some might hunt, some might manage movement, some might hold animals temporarily. Some relationships might deepen and then disappear. Others might leave genetic descendants that spread for thousands of kilometers. The evidence that survives does not give us a single doorway with a date carved above it. Instead, it gives us traces, bones, teeth, ancient molecules, lipids absorbed into pottery, changes in generation length recorded inside genomes, patterns of ancestry moving across maps long after the people and animals themselves have vanished. And before all of those traces become visible to us, there is simply this old landscape and the patience required to live within it. The steppe teaches patience. Grass returns by season rather than command. Water rises and falls according to conditions beyond any one person's control. Animals move because their own needs move them. A human community can observe, plan, follow, remember, but it cannot yet remake the whole rhythm. Perhaps this is one reason the horse will become so consequential when that rhythm finally begins to change. To domesticate an animal capable of carrying itself rapidly across open ground is to enter into a relationship with movement itself. But we are not there yet. For now, stay with the older world. Watch how often the eye returns to the herd. The horses lower their heads to feed. Their bodies shift gradually across the grass. A foal remains near its mother. Somewhere a stallion watches the movement around him. The exact social composition of an ancient herd cannot be reconstructed from a single modern analogy, but the broad truth remains: horses are social animals, and human beings trying to control one horse are never dealing only with one isolated body. They are entering patterns of attachment, alertness, following, separation, and group movement that already exist. To move a herd, you must learn how a herd moves. To hold a horse, you must defeat the simple solution available to every frightened prey animal. Leaving, that single fact helps us understand why the story is so slow. It is tempting from the far side of history to imagine domestication as a flash of cleverness. A person looks at a horse, realizes it could be useful, climbs onto its back, and a new age begins. The archaeological record gives us no such clean moment. No first rider has stepped out of the earth and introduced himself. No surviving object tells us the exact morning when a horse first accepted sustained human control. Even the physical traces, once treated as direct proof, can become uncertain when new methods arrive. Tooth wear at Botai, for example, was once widely used as evidence for bits and therefore for close control, perhaps riding. Later researchers argued that similar wear could arise naturally. Other scholars have defended the broader case for horse husbandry at Botai using multiple lines of evidence. The argument continues because the past is not obligated to be simple for us. That uncertainty belongs inside this journey, not as confusion, as humility. There are things we can know strongly, things we can know cautiously, and things we may never know at all. The first rider belongs to that last shadowed category. But the broader transformation is visible. By the 4th millennium BCE, something changes in northern Kazakhstan. Human settlement changes. The economic importance of the horse changes. The relationship becomes denser, more concentrated, harder to explain as ordinary hunting alone. We can feel that change first, not in a dramatic invention, but in the shape of a settlement. Before Botai, people in this region live in smaller, more temporary places. Then large, more permanent communities appear. At Botai, hundreds of structures have been identified or estimated across a substantial settlement. Archaeologists uncover semi-subterranean houses, hearths, storage and working areas, pottery, stone and bone tools, and deposits dense with the remains of daily life. And everywhere, increasingly, the horse. The shift is so pronounced that alters how the whole landscape must be imagined. This is no longer merely a place through which hunters pass while taking many kinds of game. Here, horse remains dominate the animal assemblage to an extraordinary degree. In one analysis, roughly 99% of the animal bones studied were horse. Sheep, goats, and cattle, the familiar livestock package that transformed other parts of the ancient world, are absent from this main Botai context. Dogs are present. The settlement, therefore, does not look like the agricultural villages many people instinctively picture when they hear the word Neolithic. There are no great wheat fields surrounding Botai in the evidence we have. No barley economy defines the place. No herds of sheep and cattle crowd its margins. Archaeobotanical work has not found strong evidence that domesticated cereals formed the foundation of daily subsistence during the main occupation. Instead, samples contain wild plants, goosefoot, dock, sedges, knotweeds, steppe grasses, and others. Some may have been gathered or used for food, bedding, fuel, or practical purposes, but we cannot assign every species a particular job without moving beyond the evidence. So let the settlement remain strange. Let it resist the urge to become a generic prehistoric village. The identity of Botai is not a row of grain fields. It is earth, grass, river, hide, smoke, bone, dogs, and horses. The houses sit partly within the ground, using earth and organic materials in forms whose complete upper structures remain debated. That uncertainty also matters visually. We need not raise perfect, reconstructed roofs and pretend that every wall is known. It is enough to feel a community settled more firmly into the land than the mobile groups before it. Inside, fire gathers people into pockets of warmth. Outside, the wind has not changed simply because human settlement has. It still crosses the steppe freely. It carries the smells of wet earth, trampled vegetation, smoke, animal dung, raw hide, blood, drying meat, and the heavier organic work of processing animal bodies. None of these scents survive in an archaeological layer as scent itself, but they follow safely from activities the remains do preserve. The sound changes too. There are more human voices gathered in one place, more work around bone and hide, stone against material, a dog calling from somewhere between structures, and horses close enough, perhaps, for their breathing and movement to belong to the daily soundscape rather than only to the far horizon. This nearness is where the story becomes delicate. At Botai and the related site of Krasny Yar, researchers have identified features interpreted as possible corals. Soil chemistry, including elevated phosphorus and residues consistent with dung accumulation, together with patterns of posts and enclosed space, has been used to argue that horses were being kept within controlled areas. Other evidence from Botai has also been associated with horse dung. If that interpretation is correct, then a profound boundary has been crossed. Not necessarily the boundary into riding, not necessarily the boundary into the ancestry of every modern domestic horse, but the physical distance between human and horse has changed. A horse that once escaped across open country can now be held within a human-made limit. Think about how modest that limit might look. Not a monumental wall, not an architecture anyone would travel to see, posts, a boundary, trampled soil. Dung collecting where animals remain longer than they would have remained by chance. Yet a simple enclosure can contain an idea larger than itself. The landscape no longer decides every movement. Humans are beginning to decide where some horses may stand, and still, even here, control is not complete. An animal held near people must be watched. It must be moved. It may struggle against confinement. It must feed. It must drink. If humans are to keep horses alive rather than simply kill them immediately, they must understand their needs in a new way. The knowledge of the hunter begins to change function. The hunter once asked, "Where will the herd go?" The herder must also ask, "How can the herd remain?" This does not erase the old relationship. At Botai, horses are still killed in great numbers. Meat remains central, but the possibility of keeping living horses introduces a different kind of value. A dead horse gives everything at once: meat, fat, hide, bone. A living horse gives something else: time, and time is where domestication lives. If an animal remains alive under human influence, another season becomes possible, another foal, another decision, another generation shaped, even slightly, by which animals are kept close and which are not. The strongest genomic work now suggests that Botai itself may indeed preserve signs of human-controlled husbandry. A 2024 study found shortened generation intervals in the Botai horse population, consistent with people influencing reproduction. That does not mean the Botai horses became the ancestors of the vast majority of domestic horses alive today. Later genetics would reveal something more surprising. The lineage that eventually spread across Eurasia came from elsewhere, but that knowledge belongs farther along the plain. For now we remain in northern Kazakhstan, in a settlement where the horse has moved from the edge of human attention toward the center of human life. The change can be measured in bones, it can be suggested by soil, it can be traced in genomes. But here, inside the lived world, it is also a change in ordinary distance. A person no longer sees every horse as a dark shape moving away across the horizon. Some horses remain near the settlement, near smoke, near voices, near dogs, near the smell of worked hide and cooked meat, near the hands that once reached them only after the hunt was over. The steppe itself makes that narrowing difficult to mistake for simple possession. A boundary does not turn a horse into an obedient tool. The animal still carries the instincts that kept its ancestors alive. Sudden movement matters. Unfamiliar approach matters. Space matters. The people living here cannot simply command those instincts away. They must work around them, and over generations perhaps begin to favor the animals that endure human proximity more readily. That possibility is one of the quiet mechanisms behind domestication. Selection does not always need to begin as a conscious plan. If calmer animals are easier to keep, easier to move, or more likely to reproduce under human control, their descendants can gradually become more common within the managed population. Thousands of years later, genetics will reveal powerful selection in domestic horses around regions associated with behavior, stress response, movement, and body form. But here at Botai, we are still much earlier in the process, close enough to the wild relationship that every gain in proximity should feel fragile. And the seasons keep testing that relationship. In cold weather, the horse grows a heavier coat. Breath becomes visible in the air. Snow can soften hoofbeats that would sound hard against dry ground. In warmer periods, the smell of vegetation and wet soil returns more strongly around water. The people and the animals occupy the same changing climate, though not in the same way. A human enclosure may alter where a horse stands for a while, but it cannot remove the need for grazing, water, shelter from severe conditions or movement. Control, then, is not mastery, it is work. It is repeated attention. It is learning that the animal kept alive today must still be managed tomorrow. The evening wind moves across the same open country it crossed generations before. Beyond the settlement, the steppe is still wide enough to make human structures look temporary. Grass bends. Cloud shadow passes. Water darkens as the light changes. Farther out, horses still move where they choose. Closer in, another group stands within a boundary made by people, shifting weight, breathing into the cooling air. listening to sounds that would once have sent them farther away. And between those two groups of horses, those beyond human reach and those beginning to remain close, the old distance has not disappeared. It has only begun very slowly to narrow. The horses closest to the settlement do not stand still for the story we would like to tell about them. They shift. They test the edge of confinement. They turn their heads toward movement. Their ears catch the change in a human voice, the step of a dog, the scrape of something against wood or packed earth. Even if some have begun to tolerate the presence of people, tolerance is not trust, and familiarity is not obedience. The animal remains alive inside every attempt to control it. That is what makes this world so different from the one that will come much later. There is no stable routine inherited from centuries of horse keeping. No long tradition of saddlers, farriers, riding schools, or carefully written knowledge. Whatever is being learned here is being learned through repetition, failure, memory, and the ordinary pressure of survival. The people of Botai do not need the horse to become symbolic before it becomes useful. Its body already has value. When an animal is killed, the settlement receives meat, fat, hide, bone, and other materials that can be worked, consumed, dried, stored, shaped, or burned. The density of horse remains around Botai makes this impossible to ignore. The horse is not standing outside the human economy. It is at the center of it. A butchered carcass changes the sensory world immediately. Warmth leaves the body slowly. Blood darkens the ground. Hide separates under practiced hands. Stone edges meet muscle and connective tissue. Bone is exposed, struck, cut, or carried away. Fat has its own weight and texture. Meat can be divided among households, cooked near the hearth, dried where conditions allow, or consumed while still fresh. The work is physical and close. There is nothing abstract about it. Hands become slick. Smoke settles into hair and clothing. Dogs notice every discarded fragment. The smell of raw flesh mixes with dung, damp soil, old ash, and the dry scent of grass carried in through the doorway. And still the living horses remain nearby. That contrast may have been ordinary, here the dead animal becoming food and material, the living animal remaining part of a herd that might be watched, confined, moved, or preserved for another purpose. It is easy from a later age to separate the horse into categories: food animal, riding animal, working animal, companion, symbol. But early husbandry does not need to respect those boundaries. One species can occupy several roles at once, and the meaning of the relationship can change from one animal to another. Some are killed. Some remain alive. Some may become more valuable precisely because they remain alive. That difference is where another possibility enters the record. Milk. In pottery from Botai, researchers found lipid residues interpreted as consistent with mare's milk. The evidence does not allow us to reconstruct a familiar drink, a recipe, or a daily custom in detail. It does not justify imagining a named fermented beverage prepared in a known way. Yet it raises a quiet and important possibility. Some horses may have been useful without first being killed. A living mare can give something repeatedly, not once, but across time. This changes the rhythm of value. Meat arrives at death. Milk requires continued life. It requires access to the mare, knowledge of her condition, and some degree of control over her presence. It connects human need to the animal, not only at the moment of slaughter, but through days and seasons. The difference is subtle, but it matters. A person approaching a mare for milk must come closer than a hunter studying a distant herd. The animal must remain near enough. A foal may need to remain nearby as well, because mare and young are bound to one another by more than human intention. We cannot reconstruct the exact technique used at Botai from residue in a pot, and we should not pretend that we can. But if mare's milk was collected, then the human body and the living horse had already entered a much narrower space together. That space is weight, smell, temperature. A horse's coat under the hand is not the same in every season. In cold months it grows heavier. In warmer weather it lies closer to the body. The flank rises and falls with breathing. The skin shifts when touched. Muscles tighten before movement. A nervous animal can transmit tension before it takes a single step. To work near such an animal is to learn signals that rarely survive archaeologically. The slight turn of the head, the sudden stillness before flight, the way one horse reacts when another moves. The difference between a body that is merely attentive and one that is about to pull away. This kind of knowledge is not written in the soil, but it is demanded by the activities the soil suggests. If horses were corralled, they had to be brought in. If they were milked, they had to be approached. If some were kept alive while others were slaughtered, choices had to be made. Every one of those acts depends on behavior, and behavior over generations can become part of selection. Perhaps the easiest horses to keep were not the strongest or the largest, but the ones that endured human proximity with slightly less resistance. Perhaps a mare that remained manageable near a settlement was more useful than one that repeatedly escaped. Perhaps young animals growing around people learned a world in which smoke, dogs, human voices, and confined spaces were not immediately followed by danger. We should be careful here. The archaeological record does not preserve a list of preferences spoken by Botai herders. It does not tell us which foal someone liked best or which mare was easier to handle. But the later genetic record does show that human control over reproduction eventually changed the horse profoundly. At Botai itself, shortened generation intervals are consistent with husbandry and reproductive management. So the path can be imagined not as a deliberate breeding program in the modern sense, but as a gradual narrowing of possibilities. The animals people can manage remain closer. The animals people choose to produce more young under human influence. The generations turn more quickly, and the line between a hunted population and a managed one becomes harder to see from inside the life of the settlement. Morning light enters low across the steppe. Smoke from the hearth does not rise straight for long. Wind takes it, bends it, thins it. Outside, the ground around an enclosure is different from untouched grassland. It is trampled. Hooves break the surface. Dung accumulates. Repeated movement makes paths where no path existed before. Soil chemistry, thousands of years later, will preserve something of that concentration. But to the people living here, it is not chemistry, it is mess, it is work. It is another place that must be watched. An enclosure means the horse cannot simply solve discomfort by disappearing toward the horizon. That gives humans more control, but it also gives them more responsibility. Animals held close must still reach food and water. They must be moved, released, gathered again. or managed within the limits of what the landscape can provide. This is why domestication is not the end of movement. It reorganizes movement. The herd still needs grass. The herd still needs water. Season still matters. Weather still matters. The steppe remains larger than the settlement. Human beings are not replacing the ecosystem. They are beginning to negotiate with it through another species. That negotiation changes what people notice. A hunter watches where wild herds go. A herder must notice what happens when animals stay too long. A hunter studies escape. A herder studies return. A hunter sees the herd as opportunity. A herder begins to see continuity. The same people can, of course, contain both ways of thinking. There is no reason to imagine a clean psychological border between hunting and husbandry. At Botai, slaughter remains central. Wild and managed relationships may overlap. The settlement may contain animals held under different degrees of control. The evidence itself seems to insist on this complexity. Horse bones dominate. Possible corals appear. Mare's milk may have been used. Generation intervals shorten. And yet the famous signs, once used to prove riding, are not secure enough to end the argument. The teeth are part of that uncertainty. Some Botai horse teeth display patterns of wear that were interpreted as evidence for bits. If a horse had worn a bit, then humans were controlling its head with equipment in a way strongly associated with riding or driving in later periods. For a time, this seemed to bring the first rider much closer, but later analysis challenged that interpretation, showing that similar wear could result from natural processes. The older certainty dissolved. This is one of the useful silences in the archaeological record. We can stand very near the possibility of riding without forcing it to happen. A person may have placed some form of organic material around a horse's head. A person may have climbed onto a horse. A person may have done so briefly, awkwardly, without creating a lasting tradition. Or the evidence may belong to other forms of handling entirely. We do not know enough to turn any of these possibilities into a scene of fact. So no first rider needs to appear. No triumphant figure has to rise above the plain. The quieter truth is more powerful. Humans are learning how close they can come. They are learning what a living horse will permit. They are learning where control begins and where the animal still resists. There may be moments when someone leans against a horse's side, feels the heat through the coat, and steps away. There may be moments when a horse pulls hard against a tether or boundary. But even these ordinary gestures must remain generalized rather than assigned to a named person or a specific event. The story does not need a hero because the transformation is larger than any one life. It unfolds through repeated contact. A foal born near human activity hears different sounds than one born far beyond the settlement. Dogs bark. People move between houses. Stone strikes bone. Fire cracks. Voices travel through the settlement. Wind shakes the outer materials of a dwelling. The foal still belongs to a horse social world, still follows its mother, still learns from the reactions of other horses. But human presence becomes part of the environment rather than an interruption arriving only with the hunt. That difference can accumulate. Habituation is not domestication by itself, but it creates a different behavioral landscape. An animal that does not flee at the first human movement can be handled more often. An animal that can be handled can be managed more effectively. An animal managed over generations can enter a reproductive system increasingly shaped by human choice. Slowly, the biological and cultural processes begin to overlap. The human community changes its habits around the horse. The horse population changes under human pressure. Neither side remains exactly where it began. Yet Botai will not become the final answer. This is one of the great surprises hidden beneath the calm surface of the story. For many years, Botai seemed to offer a beautifully simple origin, an early horse-centered culture in northern Kazakhstan, evidence of milk, evidence of confinement, possible evidence of bredling, and therefore perhaps the place where the domestic horse began its long journey into history. Genetics disturbed that simplicity. Ancient DNA showed that Botai horses were not the principal ancestors of the domestic horses that would later spread across Eurasia and dominate the modern world. Their lineage is instead closely connected to the branch that includes Przewalski's horses. The central point is clear enough for our journey. The horse population managed at Botai did not become the great expanding domestic lineage that would later carry humans across enormous distances. One of humanity's earliest, deep experiments in horse management may have led down a path that did not become globally dominant. The thought is strangely peaceful. History is full of beginnings that do not become endings. A community can discover a way of living that matters intensely for centuries and still leave no direct line to what later peoples consider normal. Botai does not become unimportant because its horses are not the main ancestors of modern domestic horses. It becomes more interesting. It tells us that human beings may have crossed the threshold into horse husbandry more than once, with more than one horse population, and perhaps for more than one reason. Domestication begins to look less like a single torch passed forward and more like small fires lit in different places. Some go out, some remain local. One later spreads until its light is visible across nearly all of Eurasia. But we have not reached that later fire yet. For now, the day remains at Botai. Inside one of the semi-subterranean houses, the air is warmer than outside. Earth buffers the wind. Smoke lingers close to the materials of everyday life. Pottery sits among the tools and remains of ordinary work. Bone and stone are close at hand because nearly everything useful is made from what the landscape can provide or what human hands can transform. The architecture itself feels temporary when compared with the centuries that follow, but to the people living here it is home. Meals are prepared. Tools are repaired. People sleep while wind crosses the roof above them. Outside, horses alter the rhythm of labor. They are not a distant resource that appears only during successful hunts. If some are being managed, then their presence creates recurring tasks. A herd must be watched more than once. An enclosure must continue to function. Animals must be approached again tomorrow. Repetition becomes its own technology, not metal, not wheels, not writing. Routine. The simplest repeated action can become transformative when it lasts across generations. Approach, observe, move, hold, release, select. Remember, each verb is small. Together they change a species relationship, and they change human time as well. A hunting success can be sudden. Husbandry stretches responsibility across seasons. The future matters differently when some of tomorrow's food, material, or milk depends on animals that are alive today. That means the horse enters human planning, not yet as transport. not yet as speed, as continuity. A mare is no longer only the meat she might provide. If milk is being collected, she is also tomorrow's milk. If her foal is valuable, she is also another generation. If her temperament makes her manageable, she may be worth keeping for reasons that do not exist in the body of a freshly killed animal. Time begins to gather around the living horse. Perhaps that is the quietest definition of domestication available to us. Not ownership, not riding, not a rope. The decision to build part of the future around an animal that is still breathing. Outside, evening comes gradually across the open country. The temperature falls first along exposed skin. The smell of smoke grows sharper as cooler air settles. Horses draw closer to one another. Some lower their heads. Others remain attentive to movement beyond the edge of the enclosure. A person carrying meat passes one way. A dog follows. From another structure comes the dull knock of work against bone. Nothing in this scene announces that the human world is changing. No monument rises. No city wall appears. No wheel turns. And yet beneath the ordinariness, several boundaries are already becoming less certain. Wild and managed, hunter and herder, food and living resource, distance and proximity. The same horse can stand on both sides of these divisions depending on the day, the season, the herd, the choices people make, and the limits of what the animal allows. That is why the argument over riding matters less here than it first seems. Riding will matter enormously later. It will change movement, warfare, communication, and the scale of pastoral life. But the relationship between humans and horses has to become dense before riding can become transformative. A person cannot build a transport system out of a rare moment of daring on the back of a frightened animal. The deeper revolution is reproducibility. Can horses be kept? Can they be bred? Can enough of them be produced? Can behavior become predictable enough that human plans begin to depend on them? Those questions will become visible in the next great lineage. Far to the west of Botai, across immense distances of grassland, river valleys, and changing ecologies, another horse population will eventually become the foundation of the domestic horses that spread through Eurasia. Its rise will not erase Botai. It will simply redirect the journey. The wind that crosses northern Kazakhstan also belongs to a larger world. There are no borders in it, only distance. Beyond one river system lies another. Beyond one grassland, more open country, human communities move, meet, separate, exchange, and adapt. Horse populations do the same in their own ways. Over centuries, ancestry shifts. Some lineages diminish. Others expand. The future domestic horse is not waiting fully formed in one enclosure. It is emerging from a different population farther west, where human control over breeding will become increasingly intense. Before that population surges outward, though the lessons of Botai remain in the air around us, a horse can be kept close. A living mare may be more valuable than a dead one in more than one way. A herd can be influenced. Generations can be shortened. Human choice can begin to enter reproduction. And the old space between the two species can become small enough that what was once only prey now spends part of its life inside a human-made boundary. The night deepens over the settlement. The horses do not know that another lineage will one day overshadow theirs. The people do not know that thousands of years later, fragments of fat absorbed into pottery and slight changes hidden inside ancient genomes will be used to reconstruct their relationship. They know only the immediate world, the need for food, the feel of cold air, the labor waiting when light returns, the movement of animals beyond the houses, and somewhere far beyond the reach of this settlement, across the long western steppe, another population of horses continues to live beneath the same open sky, still carrying within it a future no one has yet learned how to see. That future is still hidden inside ordinary animals, far to the west of Botai, beyond rivers that bend through the grasslands, and beyond distances that would take human feet many days to cross. Horses graze beneath another stretch of the same immense sky. They do not look toward the east. They do not know that another population of horses is being managed there. They know only grass, water, weather, one another, and the changing pressure of human presence, here across the western Eurasian steppe, and especially around the lower Volga and Don regions. Another relationship is taking shape. It does not announce itself with a monument. There is no stone inscription saying that one age has ended and another has begun. Instead, the evidence will survive inside bodies, inside bones, inside teeth, and most quietly of all, inside strands of ancient DNA. Thousands of years later, when researchers compare the genomes of horses buried across Eurasia, the movement of these animals will become visible in a way no ancient traveler could have imagined. Lineages that once seemed alike will separate. Populations will reveal different ancestries. Some will fade from the record. Others will spread across extraordinary distances. One of those populations will become what researchers often call Dom2. It is the lineage that will come to dominate the ancestry of modern domestic horses. Its deepest rise is associated not with Botai, but with the western steppe, especially the lower Volga Don region. And for a while, there is no reason to think that anyone standing beside one of these horses would recognize what is about to happen. The animal still lowers its head to feed. Wind still lifts the mane. Mud gathers around the edge of water. A foal still stays close to its mother. Nothing about the sound of hooves on earth tells you that this population will one day spread across much of Eurasia. History often looks obvious only after it has happened. From inside the living world, it is made of small choices, which animals remain close, which are allowed to reproduce, which are easier to manage, which endure human proximity, which survive, which produce young, and over enough generations those choices begin to leave a biological signature. The transformation is not sudden. During the later 4th and earlier 3rd millennia BCE, different horse populations remain distributed across a vast continent. Human relationships with them are not uniform. Botai has already shown that close management can develop without producing the lineage that later becomes globally dominant. Other communities may have hunted horses, managed them in different ways, or drawn them into local systems that left little lasting genetic legacy. There is no single road leading forward. There are many paths across the grass, yet somewhere among those paths the ancestors of Du-M2 begin to pass through an increasingly narrow gate of human selection. Genomic evidence indicates that before the great expansion of these horses, their population experienced a marked bottleneck. Diversity contracted. Some animals contributed more heavily to future generations than others. In certain cases, researchers have even found evidence consistent with close breeding. To us, looking backward, These are statistical patterns. To the people living with horses, they would have been practical decisions. Keep this mare. Use this stallion. Do not lose that animal. Let those horses reproduce. Perhaps some choices were deliberate in ways we would immediately recognize. Others may have been simple consequences of management. If only a limited number of horses were kept under close control, then only those animals could contribute to the next generation of the managed herd. The result is the same kind of quiet pressure. Human life begins to enter the horse's family tree, not metaphorically, literally. Generation after generation, ancestry is being redirected. The wind passing over the lower Volga-Don grasslands carries no awareness of genes. People do not need the language of heredity to recognize that young animals resemble their parents. They can see temperament, body size, movement, coat, endurance, reactions to handling. The knowledge is immediate. A difficult animal leaves a memory in the arms that tried to hold it. A calmer one changes the work of an entire day. A horse that tolerates confinement requires less struggle. A horse that remains manageable around people can be approached again. And if such animals reproduce more often under human care, behavior itself begins to shift within the population. Much later, genomic studies will identify strong selection around regions associated with behavior, stress response, locomotion, and body form. One of those regions lies around a gene called ZFPM1. Another lies around GSDMC. The names belong to modern laboratories, not to the steppe. No ancient herder ever needed them. What mattered was the living expression of the traits beneath them. How an animal reacted, how it moved, how its body carried strain, how manageable it became. Researchers have associated selection around ZFPM1 with behavioral domestication and altered stress response, while selection around GSDMC has been connected with locomotor and vertebral characteristics. Later work has suggested that selection around ZFPM1 became increasingly apparent around 5,000 years ago, while strong selection around GSDMC intensified somewhat later. But here, inside the older landscape, we do not need to see genes as instructions. We can feel their consequences more simply. A horse watches a human approach. Once, the safest response was always distance. Now, within a managed population, some animals remain, not because fear has vanished, not because wild instinct has been erased, but because the balance has begun to change. The horse that can live near humans enters a different future from the horse that cannot. This is one of the most important transformations in domestication, and one of the least spectacular. The animal does not become tame all at once. The human does not become master all at once. There is only a gradual increase in what can be tolerated, a hand near the neck, a rope or organic restraint, a crowded enclosure, a human moving along the side of the body, a dog nearby, smoke, voices, other horses being separated and returned. Each experience tests the distance between flight and acceptance. And because horses are social animals, humans are not changing only individuals. They are entering herd life. A mare's movement can draw another horse after her. A foal learns from the reactions around it. A stallion responds to the position of others. Managing horses, therefore, means learning not just anatomy, but relationships. The herd is itself a structure. Human beings who become successful at handling horses must work with that structure rather than pretending it does not exist. Even today, Much of horse handling depends upon reading attention, movement, and reaction. In the 3rd millennium BCE, such knowledge can exist without books, without diagrams, without formal schools. It can pass from body to body. One person demonstrates. Another watches. A child grows up seeing what adults do around animals. A mistake is remembered because it hurts. A successful method survives because it works. The information lives in practice. This is how a culture can become increasingly skilled without ever writing a sentence about itself. And as skill increases, the animal becomes useful in new ways. Not all at once. Not everywhere, not with certainty, but possibility widens. The question of riding now begins to hover more closely over the steppe. It is one of the most tempting questions in the whole story. When did someone first sit on a horse? The imagination wants an answer because the image is so powerful. A human body lifted from the ground, the plain scene from higher up, movement suddenly shared between two species. But the archaeological record does not offer a secure first scene. Some researchers have argued that human skeletal changes from Yamnaya period burials are consistent with habitual riding. Certain patterns in the pelvis, femur, and spine have been interpreted as signs of repeated equestrian activity during the early 3rd millennium BCE. If that interpretation is correct, some people may already have been riding horses long before the Great Dam-Tu expansion around the end of the 3rd millennium. But other researchers have challenged this conclusion. The same skeletal changes, they argue, may result from other forms of strenuous activity. Bone can record the life of a body, but it does not always tell us exactly what that body was doing. The debate has continued. More recent arguments have again defended the possibility of early riding, proposing that different horse populations may have been managed and ridden before the later DOM2 expansion. So we remain where the evidence leaves us, close to the horse, close to the possibility, but not close enough to identify the first rider. That uncertainty allows the landscape to stay honest. Perhaps some people did ride. Perhaps they did so only briefly. Perhaps riding existed as an occasional practice long before it became a system capable of changing societies. The important distinction is scale. One person on one horse is not yet an equestrian world. A society transformed by horse-based mobility requires more. It requires animals in sufficient numbers. It requires reproduction under control. It requires knowledge that can be repeated. It requires horses whose behavior is predictable enough that people can plan around them. And above all, it requires a population that can grow. This is where Dam-Tu begins to separate itself from earlier experiments. The horse is no longer merely being brought close. Its future reproduction is increasingly being organized. Genomic evidence shows that the generation interval in this lineage will eventually become dramatically shorter. Before that sharp change, average generations were longer. Later, around the Great Expansion, humans will push reproduction so intensely that new generations appear much more rapidly. The full acceleration belongs a little farther ahead, but its foundations are already forming. A herd under human influence does not reproduce exactly as a wild population does. People can decide which animals remain together. They can keep younger animals close. They can allow some to breed earlier. They can remove others. They can favor certain lines, even without understanding heredity in modern terms. The horse population begins to reflect human schedules. This is more profound than it first appears. Wild reproduction follows ecological pressures, social structure, season, survival, and the animals themselves. Managed reproduction introduces another force, human intention. The seasons still matter. Grass still grows when conditions allow. Mares still carry young according to their biology. Foals still need mothers. But now another species is beginning to influence which pairings are possible. In this way, domestication reaches beyond behavior into time itself. The rhythm of generations begins to change. The people who make these choices may never see the long consequence. A human life is short compared with the centuries needed for a population to transform. Someone may remember only a few generations of horses directly. A grandmother remembers an older mare. A child knows her descendants. Another generation sees different animals again. No one needs to witness the whole process for the process to continue. Time completes what individual people cannot, and the horse changes alongside them. Even color begins to tell a story. Wild horse populations tend to show more limited coat variation than later domestic populations. Ancient DNA indicates that by the 3rd millennium BCE, coat colors associated with human managed horses become increasingly diverse. Black, chestnut, and other color variants spread more widely. We should not imagine every domestic horse suddenly appearing in the spectacular range of modern breeds. The transformation is gradual, but diversity begins to increase. A herd that once blended into the earthy colors of the steppe can slowly become more visually varied. One animal catches the light differently. Another has a darker coat. Another carries a coloration that might once have been uncommon. Whether people selected every color intentionally cannot always be known. But increasing variety itself is another sign that the reproductive world of horses is changing. The human eye begins to see individuals where once it may have seen mainly prey. This mare, that stallion, this young animal, that coat, that temperament. Identity becomes useful. A managed herd demands recognition. You must know which animals belong within it. You must remember which mare produced which foal. You must notice which horse is missing. You must recognize which animal is easier to approach. The herd becomes not simply a moving mass, but a collection of remembered bodies. And remembering bodies changes human relationships. A wild herd disappearing over the horizon can become anonymous again. A managed horse returns. You see it repeatedly. You know its habits. You learn the shape of its face, the particular movement of its ears, the way it responds when separated, the sound of its breathing after exertion. We cannot recover those individual ancient relationships by name. No horse from this world comes to us with a story written beside its bones. But the system itself requires familiarity. This is the point at which the horse begins to occupy more mental space inside human life, not only when it is present, when it is absent. Where is the herd? Where is the mare? Where is the young animal? Will the horses return from grazing? Is the water still sufficient? Has the weather changed? The human day stretches outward through the animal. The smell of a settlement also changes when many horses remain close. Dung accumulates. Trampled vegetation releases a crushed green scent during wetter seasons and a dusty one when the ground is dry. Sweat gathers beneath thicker winter coats after movement. Breath clouds in cold air. Mud sticks to lower legs. The touch of a horse becomes familiar enough that the hand learns differences in temperature and tension. There is warmth beneath the coat, even when wind bites across the plain. The animal's body contains its own small climate. Standing close to one in cold weather means standing near a source of heat that moves, breathes, and may suddenly shift its weight. The relationship remains physical before it becomes historical, and all around it, the western steppe continues in immense silence. The lower Volga and Don do not resemble barriers in the modern sense. Rivers can guide movement as much as limit it. Water draws animals and humans toward the same corridors. Grasslands extend beyond any single community. The world is connected by ecology long before it is connected by roads. Horse populations can move. Human populations can move. Ideas can move more quietly still. The knowledge that an animal can be managed does not need to travel in a written manual. It can travel with people who know how to do it. It can be learned through contact. It can arise independently. It can change when another community adopts it. This is why the emergence of the domestic horse cannot be understood as a single invention spreading unchanged from one point. The genetic story shows population replacement. The archaeological story shows varying forms of management. The human story is messier than either alone. And yet, by the later 3rd millennium BCE, the strands are beginning to gather. A particular Western Eurasian horse lineage is under increasingly strong human control. Its population has passed through a bottleneck. Its behavior is becoming subject to selection. Its movement and body are becoming increasingly suited to the demands placed upon it. Its reproduction is being reorganized. Its colors are diversifying. And perhaps somewhere within this world, people are already discovering that a horse can do more than remain close. A horse can share movement. Whether this begins with mounting, with driving, or with several practices developing at different times, the transformation requires something deeper than courage. It requires trust sufficient for repetition, not emotional trust in the human sense. Practical trust. The animal must remain manageable. The person must expect that the horse will respond in ways that can be understood. Without that predictability, movement cannot become a system. A frightening animal can be ridden once. A domestic population can reshape geography. The difference lies in generations. So the people of the Western steppe keep selecting without knowing what later geneticists will call selection. They keep horses without knowing that future historians will divide them into lineages. They breed animals without knowing that one day their choices will be visible as a contraction and expansion in genomic data. Their world is simpler and harder. There is grass. There is water. There is winter. There is the weight of work. There are animals that need watching. A young horse is brought closer. A mare remains with the herd. A stallion is chosen or retained. A generation turns, then another. The process is slow enough that no single day feels revolutionary. That may be the most important thing to remember. Humanity's relationship with the horse does not change because one extraordinary morning arrives. It changes because thousands of ordinary mornings resemble one another just enough for knowledge to survive. Someone wakes. The air is cold. Animals need attention. A rope must be checked. A herd must be moved. A young horse resists. Another has become easier to handle than before. The day passes. Then another day begins. Century after century, these small acts accumulate beneath the open sky. And now, by the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, the accumulation is beginning to become visible on a much larger scale. The Western horse population is changing quickly enough that the future can almost be felt in its numbers. More animals can be produced, more can remain under human control, more can travel with people. The potential energy of the relationship is growing. The steppe has always been wide. Soon, that width will mean something different. A river crossing will no longer mark the same effort. A distant grazing ground will no longer seem equally distant. A message, a family, a herd, or a traveler may begin to move through the landscape with another kind of speed. But before that movement becomes unmistakable, there is one final transformation taking place within the horses themselves. Human control over reproduction is becoming more intense than anything we have yet seen. Generation follows generation with increasing speed. The population begins to expand, and across the grasslands, animals descended from this Western lineage start appearing farther and farther from the place where their ancestry had once been concentrated. At first, that widening presence is almost impossible to see from the ground. A herd grazes beside a river. Another moves across open pasture days away. Somewhere farther east, another group of horses carries ancestry that would once have belonged much farther west. No ancient observer can stand above the continent and watch the pattern spread. The change happens through journeys, exchanges, breeding, migration, and the quiet multiplication of animals. But in the genomes, the expansion is unmistakable. Around the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, especially close to 2200 BCE, the DOM2 lineage begins to increase with extraordinary speed. The population that had once been more geographically concentrated starts appearing across a vast area. Within only a few centuries, horses carrying this ancestry replace or overwhelm many local horse populations across Eurasia. This is not merely movement, it is multiplication. The number of horses under human influence is increasing so quickly that the relationship has entered a new scale. Genomic evidence suggests that around this same threshold, the average generation interval in these horses falls dramatically from roughly 7.5 years to around 3.5. The meaning is quiet but enormous. Humans are breeding horses younger. More generations can pass within the same span of human time. More foals can be produced. More animals can enter managed populations. What earlier communities may have done locally and intermittently is becoming systematic enough to change the demographic shape of an entire lineage. A horse born into this world enters a different rhythm from its ancestors. Its reproductive future is less likely to be determined only by herd structure, survival, and opportunity. Human decisions press more strongly around it. Which mare is kept? Which stallion is used? Which young animal remains within the managed group? Which animals move with people? Which line continues? The work still looks ordinary. A young horse stands near its mother. A person approaches carefully. Another animal is moved away. A herd is guided toward water. Nothing about these gestures looks like the beginning of continental transformation. Yet the population is now capable of expanding faster than before. That is what changes everything. A rare, useful animal can alter one household. A large and reproducible population can alter a landscape. The horse begins to move from exceptional possibility toward dependable resource. Not everywhere at once. Not for every person. But often enough, that people can build plans around its continued presence. The old problem of distance begins to soften. For most of human existence, movement across land has been measured by the human body, by walking, by carrying, by how much food and water a person can take, by how far children, older people, animals, and belongings can travel together. The landscape has always had scale, and that scale has always imposed a kind of discipline. A river is not only water, it is a crossing. A distant pasture is not only grass, it is effort. A neighboring community is not only people, it is time. The horse begins to interfere with that ancient arithmetic, not by making distance disappear. The steppe remains wide, mountains remain steep, rivers remain cold. Weather remains dangerous. But the human relationship with space changes because another body can now share the burden of movement. Exactly how much riding already occurs at the beginning of this expansion remains debated. Some researchers place habitual riding earlier, perhaps among third millennium communities. Others urge caution, arguing that skeletal markers are too ambiguous to identify equestrian activity securely. The uncertainty stays with us, but by the time Diome-2 horses spread widely, the scale of human control is no longer in doubt. Enough animals are being produced and managed to make horse-based mobility increasingly important. The transformation may include riding, driving, herding, and forms of transport that do not all leave the same archaeological traces. This matters because mobility is larger than any single technology. A horse does not need a later saddle to change the practical world. A simple system of control, repeated successfully, can already alter how people move through open country. And the more horses there are, the more possibilities multiply. A single animal can carry one person or assist one task. Several animals can support movement over longer distances. Larger herds allow communities to replace losses. Breeding creates continuity. Knowledge becomes less fragile because it is practiced more often. The relationship becomes cultural as well as biological. Children grow up in a world where horses are not a surprising presence. They see adults handle them. They hear the sounds of animals close to camp or settlement. They learn which movements are safe. They learn how to approach. They learn that a horse can be expected to remain. This may be the deepest change of all. The horse is becoming normal. What once required an extraordinary narrowing of distance begins to become part of ordinary life. And ordinary life is where revolutions become permanent. Across the Eurasian grasslands, the physical environment encourages this transformation. Open country rewards mobility. Pastures vary with season. Water is unevenly distributed. Communities that depend on animals must respond to changing resources. A horse capable of moving efficiently across such terrain does not merely add speed. It fits into the ecology of the steppe itself. Grass turns sunlight into animal energy. The horse turns that energy into movement, and humans learn to place themselves inside that movement. The cycle is simple enough to feel ancient. Horse lowers its head. Grass is torn between the teeth. Hours later, the same body crosses ground that would tire a human more quickly. The power comes not from a machine, not from fuel stored in a vessel, but from pasture under an open sky. In this world, mobility grows from grass that thought would have been obvious to no one and everyone at once. No one needs to formulate it philosophically. People simply know that animals must feed if they are to travel. A long journey begins before movement in the availability of water and grazing. The horse carries the landscape inside its muscles. This also places limits on human control. More horses require more pasture. More animals need more water. A larger managed population is not simply wealth, it is responsibility spread across the land. Too many animals in one place exhaust local resources. Mobility remains necessary because domestication has not freed the horse from ecology. It has tied human plans more closely to equine needs. So the relationship becomes reciprocal in a practical, unsentimental way. Humans control breeding. Horses expand human movement, but the animals still require the grass, the rivers, the seasons, and the room that shaped them before domestication. A horse-based world cannot be separated from the steppe that feeds it. As Dam-2 ancestry spreads, it moves through many different environments and human communities. The process is not a single migration of one people carrying one uniform culture from one end of Eurasia to the other. Horse lineages can spread through exchange, breeding, movement, and replacement across networks of communities. Animals pass between people. Skills pass with them. A mare changes hands. A stallion is moved. A local population receives new ancestry. Within generations, the genetic landscape begins to look different. The biological expansion is therefore also a web of human contact. No map survives showing every exchange. No voice tells us why one community wanted the horses of another. But the speed of the spread tells us that these animals had become valuable enough to reproduce, move, and replace local populations on a remarkable scale. Selection continues during this expansion. The behavioral changes that made horses manageable do not become less important when numbers increase. They become more important. A system built on many uncontrollable animals would collapse under its own effort. The horse that spreads successfully through human networks must be useful not only because it can move, but because it can be managed repeatedly. Stress response matters. Temperament matters, locomotion matters. Body form matters. The long, quiet filtering of generations continues. Some traits become more common, others recede. Even the appearance of herds becomes increasingly varied as coat. Color diversity expands under domestication. The open plain may now contain horses that look more different from one another than earlier wild populations had, yet their deepest transformation is not visible from color. It is visible in dependence. A wild horse population can continue without human permission. A domestic population increasingly exists because humans decide that it should continue. That dependence is not absolute in every individual animal, but at the population level it becomes decisive. Humans create the conditions of reproduction. Humans move animals beyond ancestral ranges. Humans favor some lineages over others. And in return, the horse gives human communities a new relationship with movement. By around 2200 BCE, the shift becomes difficult to contain within the old categories. The horse is no longer simply an animal managed near a settlement. It is becoming infrastructure, not infrastructure of stone, infrastructure of flesh, a living network of speed, endurance, reproduction, and knowledge. Stone roads can remain in the landscape after their builders vanish. Horse infrastructure must be fed every day. It must breathe. It can become sick. It can be frightened. It can reproduce. It can die. This makes the system fragile in one way and extraordinarily adaptable in another. A horse can go where no built road exists. It can follow a trail through grass. It can cross land that leaves almost no permanent trace. It can carry mobility into environments where architecture would be slow or unnecessary. The human map begins to loosen from the ground. A route does not need to be paved to become important. Repeated passage can be enough. The hoof presses into soil and lifts again. Rain may erase the print. The journey still happened. This is one reason the horse leaves such a strange archaeological signature. Its greatest effect can be movement itself, and movement often disappears. A traveler passes, a herd crosses, a message reaches someone sooner, a family arrives before weather closes a route. None of these events must leave a monument. The world can become more connected while appearing, to us, almost empty. That emptiness is deceptive. Listen instead. Hoofbeats travel across firmer ground. On softer earth they become duller. Leather or other organic tack, where used, leaves little sound compared with later metal equipment. Human voices rise and fade. Animals breathe more heavily after exertion. Wind continues through grass as though nothing has changed. The soundscape remains simple, even while the human scale of life expands. Perhaps this is why the horse fits so naturally into the history of the steppe. It does not silence the landscape, it moves through it. The first great expansion of Do-2 horses also begins to change the ancestry of horses far beyond their western homeland. Local populations that had survived for millennia become rarer. The domestic lineage appears again and again. Within a surprisingly short archaeological span, a continent of many horse ancestries begins to look increasingly dominated by one. This is replacement at a scale no individual herder could ever witness. A person may know only the horses around one community, but over centuries, the accumulated preference for DOM2 animals redraws the genetic map. The reason for their success likely lies not in one magical trait, but in the combination produced by human selection and management. Behavior suitable for close handling, bodies increasingly compatible with locomotor demands, reproductive systems controlled tightly enough to increase numbers. A culture of horse keeping capable of traveling with the animals themselves. Together, these create momentum, and momentum is exactly what the older experiments lacked. Botai had deep horse management. Its people may have milked mares. They may have confined horses. They altered reproductive patterns. Yet their lineage did not sweep across Eurasia. The Western domestic lineage does. The difference is not that one community was clever and another was not. History rarely divides so neatly. Different horse populations, human practices, ecological conditions, and later opportunities produced different outcomes. One experiment remained limited. Another entered a demographic expansion powerful enough to transform the continent. This is why the story of domestication cannot be told as a staircase of inevitable progress. There were paths that ended, paths that merged, paths that survived only in genetic traces. The future was not guaranteed. Even now, at the moment of rapid expansion, nothing about the landscape looks inevitable. A winter can still kill animals. A drought can still reduce pasture. A river can still become difficult to cross. A horse can still break away. A foal can still fail to survive. Domestic life remains vulnerable to nature. Human control has increased, but control is never complete. The more deeply people depend on horses, the more they also depend on the conditions that keep horses alive. This dependence may be felt most clearly in cold weather. the steppe hardens. Vegetation lies beneath frost or snow. Water changes. The horse grows its winter coat, trapping warmth close to the body. Its breath becomes a pale cloud. Hooves break crusted ground. Humans working beside the animals feel cold through fingers, face, and feet. The horse can carry them farther, but it cannot abolish winter. There is humility in that. Every new power remains inside older limits, and when the warmer season returns, those limits shift again. Snowmelt darkens soil, water runs more freely. Fresh growth changes the smell of the land. Animals feed differently. Travel becomes easier in some places and more difficult in others. Mud replaces frozen ground. The year itself becomes part of planning, where horses move, where people move with them. When young animals are born, when herds can travel more effectively. The domestic horse brings speed, but horse-based life still requires patience. Perhaps the greatest change is not speed alone, but reach. A person does not need to travel constantly to live in a world reshaped by mobility. It is enough that others can. Information can arrive from farther away. Objects can move. Animals can be exchanged. Relationships between communities can stretch over larger spaces. Distance begins to contain more possibility. The horizon changes psychologically before it changes physically. It is still far away. But it no longer means the same thing. Once, what lay beyond it might belong to another journey entirely. Now a horse can carry a human body toward it. This possibility reshapes imagination. A distant river can become reachable. A pasture used in another season can remain within the same social world. A settlement separated by long walking distance can become more closely connected. The steppe does not shrink. Human time expands across it. And time is where the transformation can be measured most clearly. The same distance consumes fewer human hours. The same lifetime can contain more journeys. The same network can stretch farther. The same community can know more of the land around it. By the later 3rd and early 2nd millennia BCE, this change is beginning to appear not only in genes, but in technology. People are learning to place horsepower into wheeled transport with increasing sophistication. The wheel itself is older than this transformation, and humans had already used animal-drawn vehicles before the classic light horse chariot appeared. But a lighter, faster vehicle demands something different. It demands animals capable of coordinated movement. It demands control. It demands engineering light enough to use speed rather than merely weight. And in the southern Ural region, especially in the Sintashta, Petrovka world, the archaeological record will soon preserve an extraordinary convergence. Horses, specialized equipment, two-wheeled vehicles, spoked wheels, burials in which the technology of movement is laid into the earth beside the dead. The quiet biological transformation of previous centuries begins to take visible mechanical form. The change from living motion to archaeological evidence is almost gentle. For centuries, the most important part of the horse story has been difficult to see because behavior, handling, and travel decay so completely. Organic restraints vanish. Footprints disappear. Knowledge dies with the bodies that carried it. A wheeled vehicle can leave a different kind of memory. Wood itself may perish, yet the placement of wheels in a grave, impressions left in the soil, associated horse remains, and equipment can preserve the outline of something that once moved above ground. In the Sintashta, Petrovka burials of the early 2nd millennium BCE, such traces begin to give the horse a new archaeological clarity. The wheels are no longer the heavy solid forms that carried slower loads in earlier transport. The light, too, wheeled vehicles associated with this world use spoked wheels, reducing weight and making a different kind of motion possible. The horse has not created the wheel. The wheel has not created the domestic horse. Two much older histories are meeting. One history belongs to human craft shaping materials into a rotating structure capable of carrying weight across ground. The other belongs to generations of living animals whose bodies and behavior have been increasingly shaped by human management. When these histories come together, neither remains quite the same. A light vehicle gives human beings a reason to demand coordinated speed from horses. Domestic horses give the light vehicle an animal powerful and mobile enough to make that speed useful. The partnership is technical, but it is still biological. The wheels can be repaired. The horse must be fed. The frame can be built to measurement. The animal has mood, fear, fatigue, hunger, and memory. Even at the edge of this new technology, human movement still depends upon another living creature agreeing, or being trained, to move within human intention. So the oldest relationship remains inside the newest arrangement. Attention, patience, repetition. The horse must still be read. Only now, the consequences of reading it well are becoming faster. Yet before we enter those graves and the society around them, remain for a little longer on the open grass. A group of Dyumtu horses moves eastward with people whose names are gone. We do not know the exact purpose of this journey. We do not know whether every person walks, rides, drives, or alternates between ways of moving. The evidence does not permit us to invent their private intentions, but the animals themselves belong to the expanding lineage. Their ancestry has traveled farther than that of their grandparents. Their foals may travel farther still. The ground beneath them changes gradually. One river system is left behind. Another lies ahead. Grass bends under hooves and rises again after they pass. The trace is temporary. The consequence is not. Behind them lies the long work of taming proximity, controlling reproduction, selecting behavior, and increasing numbers. Ahead, horsepower is beginning to be joined to a light wheel. And somewhere beyond the next stretch of steppe, wood, hide, bone, human hands, and the bodies of carefully managed horses are coming together in a new arrangement of movement. The new arrangement takes shape slowly enough that, from a distance, it might still look simple. Wood is cut and worked. Spokes are shaped. Two wheels are made light enough to turn quickly. A narrow vehicle stands above the ground, its frame depending on balance rather than mass. Nearby, horses shift beneath human attention, their bodies already part of a lineage, shaped through generations of control. This is the world of Sintashta and the related Petroka horizon in the southern Ural region during the early 2nd millennium BCE. Here, archaeology gives us something the earlier story rarely could: a clearer outline of motion. In graves, wheel impressions and associated remains preserve the memory of light too, wheeled vehicles. Horses appear with them. The technology is not guessed from a poetic image. It is held in the arrangement of burial contexts, in the physical traces left where wheels once rested, in the surviving pattern of equipment and animal remains. The spoked wheel matters because it reduces weight. A heavy solid wheel can carry a burden. A lighter, spoked wheel can respond differently to speed. The distinction is not merely mechanical. It changes what can be asked of the horse. To pull a light vehicle quickly, horses must move in coordination. They must accept harnessing and restraint. They must respond to human direction while remaining close enough to one another that their movement becomes shared. The old problem of distance has changed completely. Once the horse fled when people came too near. Now two horses may move side by side because a human arrangement requires them to. This does not mean fear has vanished. It means fear, training, restraint, selection, and habit have been brought into a system stable enough to repeat. The repeated action is what makes the difference. A single successful attempt can be forgotten. A technique reproduced by many hands becomes culture. The horses do not understand the word culture. They understand pressure, release, movement, voice, position, and the behavior of the other horse beside them. The driver does not understand genetics. He understands which animals work together. And between those two kinds of knowledge, the vehicle moves. There is no need to turn this movement into spectacle. The most important moment may be quieter. Before anyone travels, the horses must be prepared. The animals stand close enough for human hands to work around the head and body. Organic straps or other equipment are adjusted. The horses shift weight from one leg to another. Breath moves through their nostrils. The smell of hide, sweat, dust, wood and grass gathers around the vehicle. The wheels are still. Everything that will become motion is waiting. Then the horses step forward. The first turn of a wheel is almost soundless compared with what later imagination might add to it. There is no thunderous army needed here. A light vehicle begins with creaking wood, hooves against the ground, tension moving through harness, and a driver learning the rhythm of two animals. The steppe receives this new form of movement without ceremony. Grass bends. Dust rises when conditions are dry. Wheel tracks remain for a time and then soften under weather, but the idea survives even when the marks disappear. Horsepower has entered a new mechanical relationship with human craft. It is important not to mistake this for the beginning of the wheel, or even the beginning of animal traction. Humans had used wheeled vehicles earlier, and other domesticated animals had already pulled loads. What is new here is the convergence of the light, spoked vehicle with horses capable of being controlled at speed. The horse is no longer simply close to human life. It is becoming part of a designed system of movement. The difference is visible in the burial ground, but it must have been learned in ordinary places. Someone had to shape the wheel. Someone had to join the frame. Someone had to fit equipment to a living animal. Someone had to discover which horses could move together without fighting the arrangement. Someone had to repeat the process often enough that the knowledge outlived the first attempt. These are not named inventors. They are workers in wood, handlers of animals, people who remember what failed, people who adjust what does not fit, people whose intelligence survives not in signatures but in function. The vehicle itself teaches them. If it is too heavy, the horses struggle. If the balance is poor, movement becomes unstable. If the team is badly matched, coordination fails. Human craft learns from animal limits. Animal training learns from human expectation. Neither side is independent. And this is why the chariot belongs so naturally at the end of the domestication story. It does not replace the older relationship. It reveals how far that relationship has gone. The hunter needed to understand the horse in order to approach it. The herder needed to understand the horse in order to keep it. The breeder needed to understand the horse in order to reproduce it. The driver now needs to understand the horse in order to make several bodies move as one. The layers remain inside one another. Even in this more technical world, the oldest knowledge has not disappeared. A horse that is exhausted cannot be driven indefinitely. A frightened horse can ruin a careful plan. Water still matters, pasture still matters, season still matters. The body still has limits. Nothing about technology releases the animal from being alive. That is the quiet constraint beneath every human use of the horse. A wheel can be made again from material. A horse must grow. It must survive birth, youth, training, hunger, weather, injury, and disease before it can become useful in the way humans intend. So the great expansion of horse-based mobility rests on patience as much as speed. Foals are born long before they can pull or carry. Young horses must mature. People must feed them through seasons in which grass is abundant and seasons in which it is not. Every rapid journey depends on years of slower care. The contradiction is beautiful. Humanity gains speed from an animal that can only be produced through time. By now, that time is being managed more intensely than ever before. The shortened generation intervals revealed in the DOM2 population show that people are not simply allowing horses to reproduce when they happen to do so. The rhythm itself has been accelerated. Younger animals are entering reproduction. More generations are appearing within the same span. The horse population is being enlarged deliberately enough that widespread mobility becomes possible. This is why the transformation around 2200 BCE is so important. Not because no one had ever touched, ridden, managed, or milked a horse before. Not because one morning a person invented horsemanship, but because the relationship finally reached a scale capable of spreading itself. Numbers change history. A skill practiced with a handful of animals may remain local. A skill supported by a rapidly growing domestic population can travel. The horses move outward. The knowledge moves with them. And in the southern Urals, that light vehicles begin to convert that living population into a new kind of reach. We do not need to follow that reach into every later kingdom war, road, and empire. To do so would pull us away from the quieter question that brought us here. How did the horse come close enough to change human life? The answer is already beneath our hands, not in one event, in layers. First, observation, then repeated proximity, then control, then keeping animals alive for more than immediate slaughter, then reproduction shaped by people, then selection, then population growth, then dependable movement, then the joining of that movement to human craft. Nothing in this chain needs to be absolute. Different communities may have crossed these thresholds at different times and with different horse populations. Some may have managed horses without riding them. Some may have ridden before the later demographic expansion. Some early lineages may have disappeared. Some practices may have arisen, faded, and been rediscovered elsewhere. The record is not a straight road. It is more like the steppe itself. Many paths, some visible, some erased by wind, some converging at water, some ending where the grass changes, but one lineage eventually becomes difficult to miss. DOM2 spreads across Eurasia. Its ancestry appears farther and farther from the lower Volga-Don region. Local horse populations decline in its wake. The modern domestic horse will inherit much of this expansion. Yet the dominance of one lineage should not make the earlier world seem like a failed draft. Botai still matters. Its people had already drawn horses into human systems of management many centuries earlier. They may have used mare's milk. They appear to have confined horses. Their managed population shows signs consistent with shortened generation intervals. What they did was real, even though their horses did not become the primary ancestors of most domestic horses today. There is something gentle in that reminder. Historical importance is not measured only by descendants. A life can matter without becoming the future. A community can cross a threshold without owning what happens beyond it. Botai shows us that humans had already begun experimenting with a close horse relationship. The Western lineage shows us what happened when another such relationship became demographically explosive. Sintashta shows us what human craft could do once enough controllable horses existed. Each is different. None needs to be forced into the role of single beginning. And somewhere behind all of them is the older animal, the wild horse lowering its head into grass. The animal that once survived precisely by keeping distance from the human body. That old behavior does not vanish from the domestic horse. Anyone standing near a horse still stands near an animal capable of sudden movement. The muscles are there. The alertness is there. The social attention is there. Domestication changes the probability of response, the tolerance of proximity, the reproductive structure, the habits learned across generations. It does not turn a horse into a machine. Perhaps that is why the later partnership becomes so powerful. Human beings do not gain movement by creating something lifeless. They gain it by entering a durable relationship with another nervous, breathing creature. The wheel turns because the horse moves. The horse moves because training, selection, equipment, environment, and human expectation have been made to intersect. At every moment, biology remains inside technology. A chariot standing empty is only wood. Harness without an animal is only material. A route without movement is only distance. The horse connects them. Before the vehicle moves far, the land itself sets the terms. A horse team crossing dry ground raises dust that settles against legs and wooden surfaces. On softer soil, the wheels sink more deeply and the sound becomes dull. Near water, the smell changes from dry grass and hide to mud, reeds, and cooler earth. A crossing that seems easy in one season may demand more care in another. The chariot therefore does not conquer the landscape. It negotiates with it. Speed exists only where the ground permits speed. Horses still tire. Wheels still meet ruts, slopes, and soft places. A driver who ignores terrain risks the very system he depends upon. So even this new mobility remains an act of attention. Eyes move between the animals and the ground ahead. Hands feel tension through organic lines. The horses respond not to an abstract destination, but to immediate pressure, footing, and the movement of the animal beside them. The horizon may now be more reachable, but every journey is still made one surface at a time. The sun lowers over the steppe. Long shadows gather beneath the wheels. The horses have stopped for a while. Their breathing slows. One lowers its head. Another turns an ear toward a distant sound. The vehicle that seemed so new a moment ago becomes almost quiet enough to disappear into the landscape, wood against earth, hide resting without tension, hooves planted in grass. The invention is not visible when it is not moving. That too is part of its nature. Human transformation often hides inside ordinary stillness. A domesticated horse grazing beside a vehicle looks like an animal eating. But centuries of change are present in that simple act. Its ancestry has been filtered through human choices. Its population has been expanded. Its behavior has become manageable enough for repeated work. Its body belongs to a lineage increasingly selected for the demands of human use. Its very presence far from the western heartland may be evidence of a movement larger than any single journey. And when it raises its head again, the distance around it is no longer the distance known by the earliest hunters. A human can cross more of it. A community can remain connected across more of it. A herd can be moved through more of it. The world has not become smaller in measure. It has become smaller in effort. That difference will echo for thousands of years. We do not need to name all the echoes. We do not need to follow cavalry into later battles or messengers onto later roads. We do not need kings, empires, or conquest to understand what has changed. Return instead to something smaller, a person beside a horse. The oldest image in this journey. At the beginning, the human watches from a distance. The horse notices. The herd moves away. There is grass between them, then more grass, then empty ground. Later the human follows. Later still, the animal is held within a boundary. A hand reaches the coat. A living mare remains close long enough that milk may be taken. A foal grows amid human sound. Another generation comes sooner. A lineage changes. The space closes. And now the person stands beside a horse that has learned through its own life and through generations before it that human proximity does not always mean immediate flight. That is the true scale of domestication, not the distance across Eurasia, the distance of a few steps, the few steps that once could not be crossed. Across thousands of years, humans made those steps ordinary, and once proximity became ordinary, movement could become extraordinary. The horse carried not only bodies but possibilities. A pasture that had once required one pattern of movement could be reached in another. The practical radius of a community could widen. Knowledge could pass through larger spaces. Animals could be moved between populations. Human plans could stretch farther without requiring roads to exist first. The open country became a network before it ever looked like one. No paving stones marked it. No milestones stood beside the way. There were only remembered routes, water, grazing, crossings, seasonal conditions, and the growing capacity to move between them. Horse-based mobility belongs perfectly to such a world because it leaves so little architecture behind. A road built of stone insists that movement happened here. A horse path may vanish after rain. The absence of a road does not mean the absence of connection. This is one of the reasons the steppe can feel empty to modern eyes. We look for structures. The ancient world may have been organized by motion. People knew distances through experience rather than measurement. They knew where water could be found. They knew where the ground hardened. They knew where animals could feed. They knew how weather altered the journey. And now, increasingly, they knew what a horse could do. That knowledge entered the body. Balance, pressure, timing. the correct moment to release tension, the recognition of fatigue, the sense that an animal is about to resist before resistance fully arrives. These forms of knowledge are difficult to bury because they were never objects. They pass between people only while people are alive, yet their consequences survive in populations and technologies. This is the strange gift of archaeology and genetics together. One shows us traces of activity, the other shows us traces of ancestry. Between them, we can approach a relationship whose most important moments were made of gestures, hands on hide, a horse turning its head, a foal following its mother toward a human enclosure, two horses stepping into the pull of a light vehicle. None of those moments needed to feel historic. Most history does not. It feels like work while it is happening. The person shaping a spoke may be thinking about the fit of wood. The person holding a horse may be thinking about not being pulled off balance. The person watching a young animal may be thinking about whether it will survive the season. Only distance in time turns these acts into transformation. And perhaps that is why this story belongs so naturally to the quiet. The horse did not enter human life with one loud arrival. It entered through repetition, through seasons, through generations, through the decision to keep an animal alive, through the patience to approach again, through the memory of what worked yesterday, through the willingness to build tomorrow around the same animal. The steppe grows darker. The last warmth leaves the ground slowly. The horses stand in the cooling air while the light vehicle rests nearby. Farther away, another herd moves toward water. Beyond them are more grasslands, more rivers, more communities, and paths that will continue long after the voices we have followed are gone. The horse will keep changing. Humans will keep changing what they ask of it. New equipment will come. New forms of riding will come. New societies will make the horse central in ways these early herders could not have imagined. But none of that needs to arrive yet. There is enough here. The animal breathes. The grass moves around its legs. A person passes a hand along the neck and then steps away. No name survives for either of them. No first rider needs to be found. No single inventor needs to stand at the center. The relationship itself is enough. Two species that once met mainly across the distance between hunter and prey now share the same patch of ground. One has changed the other's breeding, movement, and future. The other has changed the first species' sense of distance, and the exchange is still continuing. The horses begin to move again. Not quickly. One step, then another. The harness takes tension. The wheels turn softly through the grass. Behind them, the marks remain only for a while. Ahead, the plain is open. There is water somewhere beyond the low rise. There is grazing beyond that. There are other people beyond the next river and other horses under the same wide sky. The light is fading, but movement does not feel like departure. It feels like continuation. The wheels keep turning, the horses keep breathing, and across the old steppe, human time travels quietly with them.